Hello, how are you? Thanks for all of your recent messages on our cold cases. In just a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be doing a huge case update episode, going through all of your theories and answering all your questions as we look back at every single story that we've covered. But right now, we are going to climax this series in style with a two-part investigation that's got everything. Ghostly nuns, violent poltergeist activity, headless horsemen riding a spectral carriage, and a stakeout by the greatest ghost hunter of his age. It has been called the most haunted house in England. It is, of course, Borley Rectory. But can we separate the reality of Borley from the legend that has grown up around it? Is this really the greatest haunted house or one of the most extensive paranormal hoaxes ever concocted? We're going to be torn in both directions. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe, and buckle up as we dive into one of the most notorious hauntings in world history. I'm Danny Robbins, and this is Uncanny Cold Cases.
Secrets still remain.
Welcome to the final investigation of this series. It is a two-parter because it doesn't get any bigger than this one. The story of Borley Rectory, much like many of its apparent inhabitants, refuses to die. But over the years, this case has stirred up as much controversy as it has paranormal intrigue. To try and make sense of it now, I am joined by two of the greatest ghost hunters of our age. For Team Skeptic, forensic psychologist Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, and for Team Believer, writer and parapsychologist Evelyn Hollow. Evelyn, what a case we have here. It's hard to overstate the impact of this, isn't it? It's the stadium-filling legacy act of the paranormal.
It is. I still feel like even now we are still asked about Borley Rectory at least once a month. I think if you were to stop anybody on the streets of Britain and say what is the definitive haunted house story, they would say Borley Rectory. And it was investigated by Harry Price, who is arguably the most famous ghost hunter of all time. He's an incredibly weird and interesting character. He wrote several books about Borley Rectory, which were read by everybody. They were the Da Vinci Code of their time. And so I think it's amazing for us to actually be finally sitting down and talking about Borley Rectory.
Oh, totally. And Harry Price is going to loom large in this case, isn't he, Kieran? I know he's a real inspiration for you. For people less familiar with him, just contextualize him for us, his impact, his status within the paranormal world.
Yeah, definitely. He's a huge inspiration, both in terms of, parapsychology, because of his experimental work, looking at various paranormal phenomena, but also for ghost hunters. He used a scientific method for ghost hunting, and that impacts on what we do today. Although he was an inspiration for me, he was also hugely impactful in popularising the paranormal. And I'm sorry, Danny, but if Harry Price were alive today, he would be sitting where you would be sitting right now, because ultimately he was the uncanny of the day. He was just putting the paranormal out there through all media outlets.
Okay, well, let's get this paranormal party started. We're going to travel back to the 12th of June, 1929. As Harry Price and his secretary, Lucy Kay, set off by road for his first visit to Borley, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it village on the Essex-Suffolk border in the east of England. Lucy, 27, blonde and stylish, contrasts with 48-year-old Harry, bald, hollow-eyed, and constantly puffing away on his pipe. It's a 60-mile drive from London, and they packed everything they will need for their investigation. Cameras, a thermometer, notebooks, torches, and a bottle of brandy for emergencies. They have heard stories about the goings-on in Borley that suggest they may need it. But right now, they're slightly lost, so they stop to ask a local for directions to the rectory. "Oh," he says, looking these foolhardy strangers up and down, "you mean the most haunted house in England?" Because rumours have been flying around about Borley Rectory for decades by this point. It was built in 1863 by the Reverend Henry Bull, a clergyman from an impressively wealthy family. But a young carpenter working on the build drowned during a lunchtime swim nearby, and the rectory was said to be cursed even before it was finished. Over the years, further extensions have made the house warren-like, full of creaking floorboards and shadowy passageways. Henry Bull had 14 children and a large retinue of servants, but none of them ever felt comfortable there. Stories circulate of odd things seen and heard, until in 1892, Henry Bull dies, aged just 59, and is succeeded at the parish by his eldest son, Harry Bull, a sporty man fond of amateur boxing. He lives there with his sisters, and on a sunny afternoon in July 1900, 3 of those Bull sisters are returning from a tennis party. Entering the garden, one of them stops and points. Look, there's a nun walking there. But there's something that feels both sinister and unreal about this dark figure who drifts down the pathway towards them, and the sisters flee to the house in fear. They're met by a braver sister, Dodie, who goes out to confront the visitor, but as she does so, the nun disappears in front of her. Holy Mother Superior. And it isn't long before others see this seemingly phantom bride of Christ. A housemaid sees her dematerialize at the garden gate and is so terrified she faints. The church organist sees her standing at the front door of the rectory waiting to enter. The Bull sisters spot her peering out of her bedroom window. As the stories start to spread, the pathway where the nun appears becomes known as Nun's Walk. And it's not the only odd activity going on. Inside the house, servants' bells ring by themselves from empty rooms, and Reverend Harry Bull claims to see a ghostly horse and carriage ride by the house at night, driven by 2 headless men. The legend of Borley Rectory has very much begun. Kieran, we have only just dipped our toes in, and already we've got phantom nuns, headless horsemen. Looking at these things with our 21st century eyes, they feel almost like cliches, don't they, in a ghost story? But is that because Borley got so famous? This is like the original tune that all ghost stories since have been cover versions or remixes of.
Yeah, I think it is. There are very small elements of the phenomena in this case that may appear in earlier cases, but we've got such definitive phenomena, like you said, the nun, the phantom carriage, headless horseman. These are real tropes within ghost stories and within ghost films and stuff we see out there in the media. But not only that, there are elements here that are really interesting. The phantom carriage, for example, it's a precursor to kind of road ghosts, and that, of course, is a feature, and we've talked about that on
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, the idea of a haunted vehicle is a fascinating one.
It is. It really is. And it's very unusual as well. I mean, we almost take it for granted, that somebody's seeing a phantom carriage. But of course, in a way, that's an inanimate object. So why are we actually seeing the carriage together with the people? But also the nun. I love the idea of a nun. We see that as a trope that pops up all the time.
Oh, absolutely. And Hollywood horror films, I mean, terrifyingly so, the film The Nun from The Conjuring.
Exactly. And here we have what I feel like is kind of the origin of that, an amazing story that features through a number of different accounts and has had such an impact that we see it so often now.
Totally. And I guess, Evelyn, we think of a Victorian house as being an old place. I mean, it is now, but this is a new build back then, isn't it? We hear about how Henry Bull builds this house. So from a Team Believer point of view, if it's a new house, where is the haunting coming from?
That's the big question. So this structure was built in 1862. There was a previous structure on the grounds that had burnt down during a fire. So we do know that the land is older, things have been built on it. But as you say, Danny, this is considered a new build at the time. So where are the stories coming from? Now, we know that there's no convent on the ground, so why is there a nun? But it is, after all, a rectory. It is connected to a church. So who's to say that, a nun or nuns, plural, haven't visited? We do also know that there's a death on the ground whilst the house is being built. The big question is, why the nun? And then the next question is, why the carriage? Why the carriage being pulled by headless horsemen? That's the sort of thing we would expect to see in old Irish mythology. You have the Dullahan, who is the headless horseman. When we think of things like Sleepy Hollow, the Johnny Depp film with the headless horseman, that's where that comes from. It's not something we would expect to see in this era in this part of England.
Sleepy Hollow, obviously the second most famous hollow now after Evelyn as well.
After me.
Kieran, look, what would you be doing here if you could get your feet on the ground in Borley Rectory, which sadly doesn't exist anymore? We'll find out later on about why it doesn't exist. But what would you be doing? What would your investigation want to look at in this house?
I guess the first thing I'd be doing is looking at environmental influences. So I'd be looking at the building itself. We know that, for example, there would have been potentially kind of toxic elements to this house. And by toxic, I mean we potentially have arsenic in the wallpaper. We have lead paint.
So you should not lick those walls.
Definitely don't lick the walls. We're dealing with toxins here that, repeated exposure to them, or like you say, ingesting of them, could have a real influence. They're neurotoxins, they can affect our brain. But also we've got to think about the way that this building has been built, where it's placed. It's exposed, it's on a slope going into a valley, and because of the woodwork that has been used to construct it, they've made sure there are no gaps at all in the building. They've then used actually kind of a modern cement rather than the typical material that would be used. And because of that, there is no flexibility to that material. And therefore, you're going to get groans, you're going to get creaking, you're going to get really anomalous sounds that you can't place, but actually they're coming from the building because the material is so inflexible. The changes in temperature that happen can affect it.
Wow, I feel like I'm on paranormal grand designs here. This is a level of detail I hadn't expected. Evelyn, is the environment an important factor here?
Always. But there are lots of incidents in this case that can't be explained simply by groaning noises or the structure of the house. So we've got quite a list of them. We've got that a visiting friend claimed to have seen a phantom carriage sweep down the adjoining lane.
Okay, so that's the carriage again then?
Yep, that's not a creaking house. One of Henry's daughters saw a man standing by her bed, and she was so scared that she insisted in sharing a bed with her sister every single night from then on. And we've also got that every night afterwards, between 9 and 10 o'clock at night, the girls would always hear 3 raps on their bedroom door, and when they opened it, nobody would be there. So those are all things that aren't caused, by a house simply creaking.
Really interesting. Kieran, it strikes me that we've got something almost like an Agatha Christie mystery here. We've got this huge sprawling house in the middle of nowhere, and it's full of people, isn't it? 14 children, Henry Bull has this huge retinue of servants. Do we need to be looking at the people in this house as well?
Yeah, absolutely we do, especially if we're equating it with an Agatha Christie mystery. You know, we're looking for the suspect. With 14 people in the house, there's that potential, although the boys are sent away to boarding school, which leaves the Bull sisters there. But potentially they could be bored and just be playing tricks on each other and the rest of the family. So I think we've got to consider that.
Okay, some interesting thoughts there. Let me know your thoughts too. Put them in the comments down below. But we are only just getting warmed up on this cold case. Harry Bull and his sisters live at the rectory for 20 years. The alleged paranormal activity becomes their norm. The nun and the phantom carriage, odd fixtures that they tolerate. But then, in 1911, at the age of nearly 50, Harry shocks everyone by announcing that he is getting married. His new bride, Ivy, moves into the rectory and boots out Harry's unmarried sisters, who reluctantly move to the nearby village. But Harry and Ivy's marriage is not a happy one, and they constantly quarrel, right up to the moment when, in 1927, Harry dies in his sleep, aged 64. The official cause of death is heart disease and bronchitis, but Harry's sisters, who, as you can imagine, are not big fans of Ivy, suspect that she had a hand in it. Poison Ivy indeed. Once the funeral is over, Ivy moves to London and the rectory sits empty. It has now acquired such a reputation, thanks to the supposedly spectral apparitions and the untimely deaths of both Henry and Harry Bull, that the church cannot easily find another vicar to take it over. And it sits empty for a long time, until the Reverend Eric Smith walks into the picture. Eric has just moved to England from India, and he's desperate for his own parish. He's surprised that people aren't competing to take up the post at Borley. But soon, he will discover why. He and his wife Mabel arrive at the rectory along with a maid that they bring with them from London. On only their 3rd day in Borley, the maid decides to head off for a bike ride around the village. But minutes later, she is back, hysterical and covered in mud. She says that she has seen a nun by the front gate and that she could see right through her. The Smiths try and reassure the maid. She must have imagined it, but the girl is so terrified. She hands in her notice that day and returns to London. Eric and Mabel are disappointed in her. They're well-travelled, well-educated people. They dismiss her fears as common superstition. There is no such thing as ghosts, right? But they've got a problem now. No maid. And in the time since Harry's death and Ivy moving out, the rectory has fallen into a terrible state. It's dirty, disgusting, infested with rats and death beetles. So Mabel rolls her sleeves up and gets tidying. Whilst cleaning out a cupboard in the rectory's library, she discovers a pile of rubbish, and amongst it, a human skull, later identified as a young woman. And then, in the cellar, amidst some empty wine bottles, she finds a small bottle labelled poison. It's not a great start, but things soon get worse. At night, she and Eric hear heavy, muffled footsteps outside their bedroom. One afternoon, whilst alone, Eric hears whispering above him as he walks from the master bedroom onto the landing. The whispers seem to follow him. Suspecting a prank played by some locals who've broken in, he waits on the landing, armed with a hockey stick. The whispering begins again, but when he rushes out swinging, no one is there. One evening, alone in the house, Mabel hears the gate open. She looks out and sees what appears to be 2 headlamps and the outline of a carriage in the drive, though it makes no sound on the gravel. And this is not the only thing that sounds horribly reminiscent of what the Bull family experienced. Because those old servants' bells start ringing constantly throughout the house. In frustration, Eric cuts many of the wires, yet the bells continue to sound. After just 6 months at Borley Rectory, worn down, Eric and Mabel no longer think that their maid was crazy for running away. In fact, that is what they try to do now, asking the church authorities if they can move parish. But their request is denied. Desperate, they get in touch with the Daily Mirror newspaper to ask for help. The paper's editor phones the officers of the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, Harry Price's organisation, famed for exposing fake mediums and investigating alleged hauntings. It is time for Harry Price to get involved. The plot thickens. Kieran, you raised suspicions about one of the Bull family being behind potential phenomena. But now we've got Reverend Eric Smith and Mabel arriving on the scene and experiencing things. We're going to talk about them more in just a moment. But first, Evan, 20 years Harry Bull and his sisters live in this house, experiencing phenomena all that time. That's a long time to be haunted.
It absolutely is. I think the thing is that the Bulls are sort of accepting of it. I think Harry in particular, he's used to the nun. He's interested in the supernatural. If anything, he probably has some sort of enjoyment in it. Harry did, however, joke to a people that if after his death he didn't approve of the rector who succeeded him, he would come back as a poltergeist and he would pelt them with mothballs, which is a very specific detail.
Yeah, really interesting detail. It's so specific.
It is.
It really does feel like we are developing into Agatha Christie territory here, doesn't it? We've got Harry actually dying and people suspecting that it might be at the hands of his wife, Ivy. But we also have sightings of the nun again, and this time not from a member of the Bull family, but from a maid who's come with the Smiths from London. So be totally unconnected to this. Does that make it more convincing?
So it's interesting in that there shouldn't be a priming effect there. We have to assume that she arrived not knowing much about the house. There's also no connection, like we've already established, between there being a convent on the ground, so there shouldn't be anything priming in the sort of naming of the house or the architecture, things like that.
But there's some local legends, aren't there?
There are. So the local legend states that there was a monastery once on the same site, and that a man from the monastery fell in love with a sister from a local Catholic convent. They wanted to elope in secret, so they had a friend pull up a carriage to the place, and they were going to run away.
Did you just say a carriage?
We did say carriage,
Hang on a second. I'm leaning in here.
The story is that there was a carriage waiting essentially to take them away. But
With Headless Horsemen? Or?
Well, about to be, because they were caught.
What?
And apparently, the man driving the carriage and the man himself from the monastery were both decapitated.
Oh my goodness.
And then the nun was walled up alive inside the walls of what would now be the rectory.
I'm having none of it. Wow, is that true?
No. So...
No, how disappointing.
So the story is amazing and it fits all of the details, but when you look into the history of it, there was no monastery on that site that we can find. There's no evidence of anyone being decapitated. We don't currently have a nun's body walled up in the house.
It's so interesting. So do we have any sense at all, if this is a ghost walking through the rectory gardens, of what it might be then, if it isn't a nun?
In 1578, Joan Norfolk and Margaret Wells of Borley were executed as witches. And in rural Essex around that time, around the late 1500s, dark wool gowns would have been worn by rural women. And so from a distance, they would look an awful lot like a nun's habit. So even if we don't have the history of a murdered or anything sort of dramatic happening to a nun on the grounds, we do know that there's a strong connection to the execution of women for witchcraft in the area.
So you're saying she may not be a phantom nun, she might be a phantom witch?
One or the other.
Is that even scarier, I wonder? It's so interesting, isn't it, how we interpret these things, Kieran. And of course, the people interpreting it for us now are the Reverend Eric Smith and his wife, Mabel. What do we know about them?
Well, they're an interesting couple in the sense that they come into this kind of typical English village. Eric Smith is Anglo-Indian, but also dark-skinned and Anglo-Catholic. This is kind of this high, very traditional kind of church that's Anglican. It's a lot more liberal than the locals would have been used to. And so there is a number of elements at this particular point, a number of elements of that couple that means that they could potentially be ostracized in the village. They're not liked by the locals. And because of that, for me, it raises suspicion about the possibility that some of this phenomena might be caused by the locals. They simply might be wanting to scare this couple out and, trying to get them to leave Borley.
Is that possible, Evelyn?
I mean, it is certainly possible, but it would be really complicated. Some of the phenomena is happening directly to them when they're in the house, and there's a point where they do assume that someone has broken in. He goes out expecting to confront an attacker.
Armed with that hockey stick.
Armed with a hockey stick, and then suddenly there's nobody there. But then also he can still hear the noises and they just fade out into nothing. We'd have to be talking about people breaking into the property all hours of the night, being on the grounds. I find it difficult that nobody would be caught in all that time.
They get so scared, Kieran, that they contact the Daily Mirror newspaper, something that we see in the Enfield poltergeist case as well. The family there contact that same newspaper. Some people watching or listening will see that as a publicity-seeking act. But actually, I think we've got to understand the relationship that people had with the newspaper that they read back in those days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got to remember that this would have been a call made to a newspaper from a position of trust. It's almost as though, they would trust that a journalist, a newspaper would get involved in the investigation or at least know what to do. They would have a network of contacts and know who to contact.
And it leads them to Harry Price, of course. Kieran said he was like the Uncanny of his day. He's about to get in there and investigate.
He is. He's a very interesting character. He's quite a striking figure. But for us, it's important because it means somebody with an interest and background in science is about to go there and actually start taking measurements and recording the information.
All right, well, let us see how that investigation develops. So we find ourselves back in June 1929 as Harry Price's car swings through the gates of Borley Rectory and pulls to a halt on the gravel. Standing by the front door to greet Harry and his secretary Lucy are an anxious-looking Eric and Mabel Smith, and with them, Vernon Wall, a Daily Mirror journalist. They usher Harry and Lucy inside the house for lunch, over which Eric and Mabel recount their experiences in the house. Harry decides on a course of action. He seals the doors and windows of the rectory to stop any intruders gaining access and rule out a fake. He positions himself in the summer house built by the other Harry, Harry Bull. It's the ideal viewing location for the pathway known as Nun's Walk. For an hour, Harry and Vernon Wall, the journalist, sit there in silence, smoking their pipes. Then, Wall grabs Price's arm. "There she is," he whispers. Before Harry can stop him, Vernon dashes across the lawn, but by the time he's reached the Nun's Walk, the apparition has disappeared. Disappointed, the pair walk back to the main house. As they approach the front door, a large glass pane from the roof of the veranda falls and shatters inches from their feet, showering them with shards of glass. They rush inside the house, swinging their torches wildly in the darkness, when a vase whizzes past Vernon's head, smashing on the floor. They're suddenly under attack, it seems, from invisible assailants. They are pelted with pebbles and, remember Harry Bull's earlier promise, mothballs too. It is quite a welcome for Harry and his fellow investigators. Later that night, they are joined by the now elderly Bull sisters, once kicked out of this house by Ivy, remember. They're visiting from the nearby village. The sisters remain convinced that their former home is haunted, and they're glad that Harry is investigating. The assembled gathering move up to the master bedroom. After 20 minutes in there, they hear a distinct knock. Then another. The noises seem to be coming from the back of a mirror. They attempt to communicate with this apparent spirit, asking it to knock once for yes and twice for no. Is that Harry Bull? Yes. Are you happy? No. Were you killed? Yes. Price, asks the identity of the murderer. The entity claims to have been murdered by his wife, Ivy Bull. OMG, the revelations keep coming here. Kieran, this has shades of the Cock Lane poltergeist that we looked at together earlier this series, a ghost accusing somebody of murder. But can we hone in on one detail here, a really crucial one? Evelyn talked about it earlier. Harry Bull threatened to throw mothballs at a rector that succeeded him. Harry Price and Vernon Wall are being pelted by mothballs.
Yeah, it is quite a significant moment because you've got that connection with Harry Bull's promise, and now it appears to be happening. The only thing I would say is that, are we just dealing with a coincidence? We forget in today's day and age, we don't see mothballs that often, but of course back then they would have been quite prevalent. So,
yeah, but not flying through the air,
not
Kieran.
flying through the air, I'll give you that. But then again, I want to hone in on the Bull sisters. There is a potential motive here. Remember that they've effectively been thrown out of that building, and you know they're almost pointing an accusatory finger at the wife, thinking that she may have murdered Harry Bull. So there is almost a motive here for them to perpetuate the idea or to somehow paranormally point the finger.
Oh, you were accusing them earlier of possibly staging some of the phenomena. Now you're accusing them of being involved in this as well.
Exactly. I think we've got to keep them in that suspect lineup.
Evelyn, when Harry Price arrives in this house, things really step up a gear, don't they? We move from Agatha Christie to action movie here. We've got panes of glass nearly falling on people. We've got vases whizzing past people's heads.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to be living somewhere where people are seeing apparitions, that's passive phenomena. Active phenomena is the sort of noises, people feeling like they're being hit with small objects, things sort of moving around, banging on doors. I mean, it's not that that's not scary, it's absolutely terrifying. I mean, even it drives a maid back to London, people are fainting. It is frightening, but there's a difference between that and active bodily harm, which is things like the panes of glass falling and people being physically injured. That is different, and that's impossible to ignore. If people are being physically injured, that's not something we can say, oh, well, they're mishearing it. You don't mishear being physically injured.
It's a huge level of danger. Kieran, what would you do if you were on a ghost hunt and a vase goes past your head?
I would probably duck. That would be the first thing I would do. Absolutely. But also I'd be looking at that trajectory. I've always said it on ghost hunts that I am part of. You know, if we can be very, very sure that we've got, you know, the trajectory from its start to its finished and there's no human hand involvement, then that means potentially you've got something paranormal going on here. So that would be the first thing I would do as a ghost hunter. I'd go back to, could we see the beginning of that trajectory? And in this case, I don't think we can.
Have you ever had anything thrown at you on a ghost hunt?
I have actually, yes. I've had stones thrown at me. I've had coins thrown at me. I've had bits of building, like broken bits of brick that have flown past my head. And people might be amazed by this. It's not unnerving. I wasn't scared. I was genuinely excited, thinking, wow, is this the phenomena that I've been waiting for? But ultimately, again, these objects, for me, they came out of the dark. You know, I don't know if somebody threw them at me, and that always leaves a bit of doubt for me.
Like the idea of Kieran just going on ghost hunts and there's someone at the back with a pocket full of stones just being like, duck.
I was going to say,
somebody with a slingshot.
based on what we've witnessed on tour, I would imagine it was like middle-aged ladies' knickers.
Oh my God, Christ.
All those old Most Haunted fans. We loved you, Kieran. Sorry, terrible image to plant into everybody's heads there. Look, thank you both so much. Let's dip straight back in, shall we? Because word is out now about the celebrity ghost hunter up at the rectory. And Harry Price's visit brings an avalanche of curious visitors to Borley. It becomes a paranormal tourist destination, and they drunkenly rampage around the rectory gardens, singing, shouting, and making a general ruckus. But when no ghost materializes for them, they get annoyed. They throw empty bottles at the house, smashing the drawing room windows. It is pandemonium. And along with the alleged paranormal activity, it forces Eric and Mabel Smith to pack up and leave. They've had enough. Harry Price, though, is the opposite. He is desperate to return and investigate further. But the church, perhaps understandably, doesn't want any more bad publicity around the rectory, and they refuse him access. A new rector is found, the Reverend Lionel Foyster. He is a kindly, liberal man in his 50s, prematurely aged from ill health. And his wife, Marianne, is much younger than him, something of a free spirit. They move into the house, and just as with everybody else who has lived there before them, they begin to feel almost immediately that something is not quite right. Objects start to move. There are strange smells. Those servants' bells ring by themselves, even though Reverend Smith cut the bell wires a year before. And then, one evening, Marianne sees an old man on the landing, wearing a distinctive plum-coloured smoking jacket. She sees him again on another couple of occasions. And when she describes the man to her cleaner, the cleaner turns pale, because the woman has lived in the area for a long time. And she says that the man Marianne is describing is none other than the Reverend Harry Bull himself. Evelyn, this story has more twists and turns than a roller coaster, doesn't it? Reverend Harry Bull, it seems, does not want to go gentle into that good night.
No, I think this is the first time where we can possibly attribute a name to one of the ghosts that are in the house. It's this really striking image of him appearing in this sort of plum-coloured smoking jacket. It's the sort of thing I imagine Kieran might suit. He's got a brown one at the moment, but we get you a plum one and a pipe, maybe.
You should definitely take up smoking a pipe, Kieran. It's such a fascinating, sprawling case, this, isn't it? So much already that we've talked about, so much more to come in part 2 of our investigation.
Yeah, in effect, this is just the start of the case for me. As a boy, I was fascinated by Harry Price's investigation, and we really haven't started with that. We've just touched the surface of his first appearance at Borley Rectory. We've still got all of his investigation to go, all of the phenomena that he captures, and also the team of investigators that he brings.
Some properly scary moments.
Really scary moments.
Okay, thank you to Kieran and Evelyn there, and thank you, Uncanny community, for listening and watching. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know your questions. If you've got anything you want to ask Kieran and Evelyn, put it down in the comments down below, or you can email me, uncanny@bbc.co.uk, or find me, Danny Robbins, on social media. I'm everywhere you might look. Next week, we are back for the second part of the Borley Rectory story, our season finale episode, and we are going out with a bang.
To injure yourself to the point of cutting your eye and giving yourself a black eye is psychotic.
How can you explain 3 people sat around a table just like we are now, and this cutlery has come flying around? We would know instantly that it's one of us doing it.
I am counting the days. Until then, sleep well. Don't have nightmares.
Secrets still remain.